Hello, everyone. Hope my voice will last for this introduction to week 3. Homecoming always leaves me without much of a voice. It's all that parade yelling and things like that that I enjoy. At any rate, we move now, as we have uh, quickly before, from African only to a bit of the Middle East and reading Persepolis. And now we're going to finish up with Africa and introduce over the next 2 weeks some Asian literature. Now, when you go through and look at the notes, you're going to see notes again for Things Fall Apart and for some short stories that you aren't required to read. So just, look up what you have. You don't have to read Ding Ling's story. We're not reading which sounds funny, but it's a very good story about the Pacific War or World War II in China. But I've cut it so that we can concentrate on some other things here. So this week we're going to finish Persepolis, which I hope you can see here. We don't have that much more. Whoops, I got the wrong one. I left the other one at home. We were on part 2, which is really a bigger coming of age story of her encounters in decadent Europe and then returning to an oppressive Turhan. So I'll follow that up and see about making another video. We're also in the going into Asia, going to start reading another book. This one, A Harp of Burma. Now you have extensive notes for this book, so I won't be making any more videos unless something comes up and I decide that one would be appropriate. But at this point, not so. I will say, though, that Harp of Burma, just as Persepolis, introduces you to an Iran that's complex with people we actually like, contrary to what we usually read about what goes on in that theocracy is what it is, basically what's going on, and all the trouble with weapons of mass destruction, the conflict with Iraq, everything gets oversimplified sometimes. But so Persepolis, gives you another side, also to another side of Europe. Harp of Burma was published shortly after the United States occupation of Japan. We tend to forget about that. United States and General MacArthur, MacArthur's people, pretty much wrote the Constitution of Japan after the war, and nothing could get published that the American censors didn't like. But the Harp of Burma broke through there at that time. There's a beautiful movie, if you get a chance to watch it. The Harp of Burma. I think it's called The Burmese Harp is the name of the movie. But I think what you'll find here is that this book does not offer an apology, nor does it avoid the negative, the horrors of what the Japanese did in that area of the world, including the Philippines and other areas. But on the other hand, we have a small group of Japanese soldiers who sing. Not your usual presentation of the Japanese with the big teeth and the round glasses, smiling in a kamikaze. What you have is prisoners of war, basically, and a whole, should we say, meditation on war and questions about the future. And so Burma itself is not portrayed in a highly realistic fashion, but the author is using the Burmese society, what we call now, I can't think of the name for Burma now. I'm so Myanmar. Myanmar is as a place to contrast with Japan, to underscore the problems Japan's going to have with rebuilding and coming to terms with their past. So while you're reading it, look for those sections where they talk about, well, I wish we would have been singing these songs than the ones that we did that got everybody excited for war. And so, good, as you're reading, think about those things. The reading of the book goes rather quickly. You don't have a lot of the really difficult names. Mizushima is our main character. He is the harp player, self-taught. And so read the notes, and you'll have a chance to talk about that book um, and Persepolis in the second discussion thread. Of course, you could also talk about it in the first discussion thread, wherever it comes up. Now, the first thread is going to be, I think I gave the title of it in talking about Persepolis there, excuse me, a believer of apartheid and oppression. Apartheid is gone now. The effects of all those years since the Second World War and before of the oppression of blacks in South Africa by the whites, and maybe more draconian on the part of the Afrikaners. You should know that Afrikaners don't speak English. There's a lot. English is kind of the and Zulu languages, main languages spoken in South Africa, but also before the British were there, the Dutch, as you read in your introduction, were there, and Afrikaans is a Creole language with Dutch and English and African nations as well, but not as much. They were the hardline apartheid people, the ones that were really persecuted, the Mandela and others. So this "Call Me Not a Man," Mashoba's story is, the question is what is a man, and you can make it broader, a part of mankind, because you'll find that in a poem like "To Who It May Concern" as well, that there is a kind of like the idea of identity card. These people are treated as less than equal. And as you read about it, I mean, your names taken away. You need a damn pass to get on a train, an identity card, if you will. You can't go anywhere. You have to be out of Johannesburg, and things like that. After dark, all that kind of stuff. You can't go to the beach, swimming pools. Everything is what we would call from the United States segregated. But it was law, and there were different classes of people. There were the blacks, they were the lowest. There were the coloreds, which would include someone like Gandhi. When he was in South Africa, he was a lawyer there. At any rate, this is going on before the overthrow of apartheid and the ascendancy to the presidency of Mandela, sorry. Also, when you're in there and you're reading this story about the horrors of what goes on from this oppression, where you lose all sense of humanity, number one is when he talks about using his sisters to try to get away. He can be talking about a little legitimate, but it's also like a sister and a comrade, friends. The other thing is that the and I can't remember, Helions, the people who were the police that are there doing all these things to the blacks, are themselves black. And so keep that in mind when you're reading it. The other three are poems. To Whom It May Concern, Sepamla is about a sense of identity. The migrants' lament also comes from, as we saw when you read Bessie Head's story, so many of the people leave the countryside and come to the cities, a lot of the young, women and men both, leaving behind old people and children, basically. And the lament has to do with the fact that you have these identity laws and all these other kinds of things. And, you leave your family at home and you come and you work in these really ratty worker communities, and you live in shanty towns like the one mentioned in Call Me Not a Man. A person is a person because of other people, on the other hand, is about in this case, life in prison. But Jeremy Cronin is white. He's also a member of the Communist Party and is gay. And recently, I'll have to look again, he was also a member of the new parliament. And he's talking about the communication. In this particular case, of course, everybody becomes rather equal in this prison context. So read that, and then, of course, continue with Persepolis as our Marjane, I'm not positive how to pronounce her name. Come to think of it, I'll have to listen to another of the videos because I've lost the pronunciation. As she comes to terms with where's she going to be in the future. And pay attention to the gender kind of thing continues. Now, in Asia, also with the thoughtful, as I said, post-war novel about Japanese troops in Burma, you have a poem to read by Mao Zedong, who was of course, the leader of China after the revolution, and announcing his leadership, by the way, in Tiananmen Square, where you're going to find Notes from the City of the Sun by Beidao. You might look him up some more too, talking about what happened post Tiananmen Square that we know about. That famous picture of the boy, young man in front of the tank in Tiananmen Square. Um, that was the democracy movement, which you'll read about. But in swimming, Mao is talking about the 5-year plans. It was a big thing. He'd go in the Yellow River, I believe it's the Yellow River instead of the Yangtze, but he always went for a swim. And of course, they made him into a god. Like no one could swim like Mao and everything. But he did. It was a big thing to go, and people would take pictures of Mao swimming. And here he's talking about the greatness of what the 5-year plans are going to do go beyond the gods, because he's also in this particular poem talking about this huge dam that's going to be built to make China great. So it's propaganda, if you will. But Mao liked to do calligraphy, and he did write, including the Red Book, which is all quotations from Mao that young students had to memorize to a degree that would blow your mind. The other two stories there, the short stories, are My Old Home and A Small Incident. Now, these are poems written at the time of the Republic, which didn't last very long. It was a kind of began with optimism. The goal of China for centuries has been unification, and Mao pretty much got there, and that was the whole idea of the Republic, which turned out to be very, very corrupt and started slaughtering communists in 1927, around in there. But My Old Home is a short story about change. And the Chinese society for centuries was divided between the landowners, the upper class, and the peasants. It was a substantial pyramid, if you will, and for centuries. So My Old Home, you see, these centers of the landed gentry were like, I don't know, we've got gated communities. I mean, there would be like, a large, large compound, and keeping people from the outside, as you're going to find in the story when he comes back. The narrator used to like to play with one of the peasants, and he was, as a little boy, allowed, and the other guy knew all about nature and all these things. Well, at any rate, his old home, that the family has lost a lot. A lot of the landed gentry then would be the same ones who would get educations and get jobs within the growing bureaucracy. of China. And so he goes back and he's looking, and he's notice while he's there, he's envious of the man who looks so much older than him, who was his boyhood friend, because number one, he still believes in the old religion. He works the land. I mean, he's authentic. Let's put it that way. And pay attention in that story, My Old Home, to the ending, which, by the way, is a quotation I took from the story to put on discussion thread 2. And it's about how you change things. A great movie that was made about Tiananmen Square, and the desire for change is called Moving the Mountain. And there's a proverb about kind of a proverb about that, and a story that how long it would take to move a mountain is pretty much a good approximation of all the work that remains to be done. And you have to start it out by a small path that you have others follow. Other people have to follow the path, or you're not going to get there. And a small incident is a story by the same author, much shorter. It is a short story. Mao loved this guy. One of the first West writers of the short story genre that became internationally recognized. A small incident is just what it says. You have another of these jaded bureaucrats. It's cold out. He's warm. He doesn't really care or think about all the other people around him. He's lost touch with what's supposed to be the motivation it always was for Mao, the peasants. And so you find in both The Small Incident and My Old Home that the values that really, really, really kind of underscore how we want to change the future and what do we want to keep from traditions will be found, in the propaganda, will be embodied by the peasants and their closeness to the earth and things along those lines. So you'll see in this story that it's the driver of the rickshaw who teaches him something. And I always like to think of it too as the bureaucrat is in the big city and is working on the big ideas of the republic, let's say, and you get separated from the countryside as you do when you live in an enclosed place where the other outside world doesn't matter to you except in terms of production. You become jaded, and also you lose a sense because everything becomes these kind of abstractions or big ideas. But you need something to ground it with, and so he keeps turning back to that small incident that reminds him of what he's supposed to be doing things for, and where he's supposed to take from where does his inspiration lie? Where does it come from? And that's you're going to see that the shadow of the driver becomes larger and larger in his mind, and he goes back to that as kind of a touchstone. Now, notes from the City of the Sun. There are a whole stream of poets. There are other ones in there, and I put some other ones in the notes or mentioned some ideas. They're called the mist poets, and the mist poets were very big leading up to the democracy movement. I mean, after all, you got these guys like Beidou who and others who really took part in the Cultural Revolution, which was not unlike what you're reading about in Persepolis. In this particular case, it was a kind of a non-communal, if you will, poetry. It was a lyric poetry, and lyric poetry generally accents the I, and they're poems about love. They're poems about a lot of different things, but they're talking about the individual. And of course, in the Mao terms, in terms of what Mao's talking about, that's not a good thing. But they took part in this cultural revolution where they beat teachers. In Persepolis, for instance, when the aunt. Marjorie's aunt goes to the hospital administrators and say, "Look, you got to give my husband permission to go get this surgery he needs, and he has to go out of the country. He needs a passport." And they say, "Well, you know, God will provide." And she looks at the guy, and it's a person who knows absolutely nothing about hospitals or anything. It's a window washer. And this is the kind of thing that happened in China. Now, these guys thought they were doing it. Beidou and all the others who were involved in this thought they were, um, they believed it. It was a ruse on the part of Mao, many have argued, but they believed it. And so they survive that, and then they get excited after that, they're feeling a little guilty, certainly, about what happened and what kind of things that these young people did. The rug would be pulled out from under you. Then you get involved in the democracy movement, and they're all writing this poetry, and the people the status quo, who represent the status quo, didn't like this poetry, and they would say, well, those people are in the mist, they're in the clouds. Well, the mist cloud poets took that name identification that was thrown at them as being out to lunch, and embraced it and said, yeah, we're the mist poets. And then you see they believe in the poetry, they believe in the democracy movement, and then Tiananmen Square comes and the movement is crushed. And these people, a lot of these poets have left China. But Notes from the City of the Sun, I think there's another one in there, or maybe Beidou does it. I have to reread that tomorrow. The idea is that they, circumstance, or let's say experiences, taught them to not just buy into a lot of this stuff. So the idea would be that you become circumspect and basically with one eye open all the time. You have to watch around and not be bamboozled by the hopes for something that really is impossible to achieve, or in the terms of the Cultural Revolution, a ruse, part of a plan that takes advantage of those who lack experience in the politics. And also Mao was like a god. And he portrayed himself like that in Swimming, if you look at it closely. So anyway, I think that the literature of oppression will also certainly have a lot to do with Persepolis. Oppression, unfortunately, is international. Autocrats are as well. And then in the Chinese and Japanese, well, no Chinese literature except for the novel this week, but in the Chinese literature, you'll read, I think, you'll find it interesting, the perceptions. If you have time, read Ding Ling's story from the Second World War. And you also have notes for that. So enjoy the beginning, the ending of that wonderful graphic novel, Persepolis, and the beginning of a very exceptional and still quite popular Japanese novel, The Harp of Burma.